They called it the Bennett Legacy Gala, a night of music, champagne, and candlelight held in the grand ballroom of the estate, under the glow of chandeliers that hadn't been dimmed since the family's rise in the 50s. The Bennetts, rich, poised, immaculate, were royalty in a town too small for actual crowns, but too proud to admit it. That night, I stood on stage next to Gregory Bennett himself. He held a glass of wine in one hand and my shoulder in the other, like we were kin. To the guests, I was part of the fabric, the story, the one loyal constant in the family's ascent. "Our dear Thomas," Gregory said, his voice full of warmth. "The man who helped us build not just a business, but a legacy. 25 years of service and not a single complaint." They laughed. I smiled. I had complaints. God, I had them buried so deep I barely felt them anymore. And then the curtain fell. Behind it was the painting, the portrait, 7 feet tall, oil on canvas, ornate frame. There I was, captured in perfect detail, my face softened, hair too neatly combed, suit too crisp to be honest. They painted me with a gentle smile, one hand clutching blueprints, the other resting on the golden banister of the Bennett estate. They painted me like a monument. I stared at it in silence as people applauded. Flashes popped. A woman clapped so hard her rings clinked. Gregory stepped beside me, grinning. "You're a part of us now, Tommy." Immortalized. But that painting wasn't honor. It was a lie. A monument to a narrative they twisted. A beautiful coat of lacquer over 3 decades of silence, exploitation, and betrayal. Because behind that smile they captured so elegantly, there was rot. And I lived in it. I met the Bennetts when I was 21. Young, eager, broke. I was an architect then, fresh out of college, obsessed with detail, angles, form. Gregory hired me to help renovate the old estate. Said he wanted someone with heart, someone who would treat the property like a living thing. He said all the right things, promised mentorship, equity, a place at the table. For years, I worked like a madman, drafted until my fingers cramped, oversaw construction from dusk until dawn, gave up weekends, missed holidays. Whenever something went wrong, I fixed it. When budgets slipped, I cut my own fee. That loyalty mattered. But when the final ribbon was cut and guests walked the halls I had designed, my name wasn't on the plaques. Gregory toasted to the vision of the Bennett family. I stood in the back, glass in hand, waiting for a nod that never came. Still, I stayed. Because when you grow up with nothing, even proximity to wealth can feel like safety. The Bennetts offered me scraps of belonging, invitations to their parties, inside jokes, birthday cards signed by their staff. I convinced myself that it was enough. But behind closed doors, I was their tool. Whenever something broke, I was the first call. If a new property needed redesigning, I did it, no contract, no bonus. When Gregory's son Ryan wanted to launch a development company, I drafted every blueprint, unpaid. "Just help us get started," they said. "Your family." And I believed it. Until the deal with the water treatment plant. That was the first time I saw what they really were. They used my name, my license, my credentials to push through permits for a land project near the county wetlands. I hadn't reviewed it, hadn't signed anything, but they faked it, slipped my signature onto blueprints I'd never seen. When the public backlash started, they distanced themselves. When the legal threats came, they let me take the fall. I lost my license for 2 years. My name was dragged through the press. I couldn't find work anywhere. No firm wanted the guy who approved toxic land development. Gregory called me once, said he was heartbroken, but that I had to understand it was business. That was the moment I woke up. But I didn't scream, didn't file lawsuits. I knew better. I waited. I rebuilt myself quietly, picked up freelance work, fixed houses, slept in my truck when rent fell behind. Slowly, I gathered everything. Emails, memos, leaked documents. I learned the structure of their empire better than they did. I knew which shell company owned what, which bribes were paid, which accounts hid which transactions. They waited for the moment. And that moment came with the portrait, the celebration, the stage, the applause. It was the peak of their lie. They used my life as wallpaper, framed me like a relic of loyalty while hiding what they did behind a curtain of polished legacy. That night, when the ballroom emptied and the caterers packed up, I stayed behind. Gregory's assistant said I could take the portrait home if I wanted. I smiled and nodded, said it would mean the world. I loaded it into the back of my truck, and I drove. Miles outside town, past the river bend, and through the dead woods where they planned their next project. I pulled over, dug a hole in the ground with my bare hands, poured gasoline over the canvas, watched the face they painted of me warp and blacken. The flames reached high. I didn't burn it out of rage. I burned it to reclaim the truth. Because the painting wasn't me. It was a symbol of everything they took. My name, my years, my silence. And some legacies don't deserve to hang on walls. Some deserve to burn. The portrait burned until nothing but warped metal and scorched canvas remained. I didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stood there in the flickering dark, breathing smoke and silence. The ashes curled upward like pieces of a lie coming undone. They thought they could freeze me in time, trap me in that painting like a loyal ghost of their empire. But I wasn't done. That fire wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Because destroying the symbol wasn't enough. I wanted the truth to rot their name from the inside out. I started with their foundation. The Bennett Family Foundation had always been their crown jewel. Public scholarships, restoration grants, awards to struggling artists. Every year, they hosted a gala to show their benevolence. They stood on stage in front of giant checks and smiling recipients, beaming as if they were saving the world. But I knew where the money came from. I'd found it 2 years earlier while combing through an old backup drive Gregory had left in my office. A trove of internal memos, fake invoices, funneling charts. They used the foundation to launder dirty money from their developments. They inflated building costs, skimmed off grants, funneled it through subcontracts tied to shell companies. All while claiming philanthropy. And worst of all, they used my name on some of those contracts. So I went to work. I printed every memo, every fake invoice, labeled and time-stamped. Then I created a public site. No branding, no explanation, just the files, organized in folders named by project. I called it Beneath the Bennett Legacy. Then I sent the link to every journalist in the city. Within 24 hours, the cracks formed. Local news ran the story, talk radio picked it up, online forums lit up, and for the first time in years, people started asking questions about the foundation, about the funds, about the permits. Gregory called me the next day. No more warmth, no shoulder pats, just panic. "Tom, what the hell is this?" I let the silence sit for a moment before answering. "Truth," he snapped. Threatened legal action, said he'd sue me for defamation, theft, trespassing, anything he could make stick. I told him I had everything backed up in 6 countries. If anything happened to me, the rest would go public. Names, bank accounts, depositions. He hung up. The next week, the Bennett Foundation suspended operations. Investigations opened. Gregory and his son Ryan disappeared from social media. Their staff scattered. I watched it all from a distance, methodically, like watching termites eat through oak. But I wasn't finished, because there was still the matter of Eleanor, Gregory's wife, the real architect of the family's image. She was cold brilliance wrapped in pearls, elegant, reserved, but brutal behind closed doors. While Gregory played king, Eleanor ran the books, the staff, the politics. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. She spoke in consequences. She was the one who had pushed for the portrait, said it would seal the family narrative and honor a loyal steward. She had stood beside me that night, her hand on my arm, whispering, "You've always been part of us." I remember her perfume. I remember the feel of her fingers digging just slightly too hard into my jacket. I knew she'd fight back hardest, so I went after her last. I leaked one email, just one. It was a message she sent to a developer in Phoenix, offering to reroute public zoning in exchange for a silent equity stake. A minor move, but illegal. It linked her. Personally, the dominoes followed, not just money laundering now, not just dirty development, but political corruption, tax fraud, state and federal heat. Eleanor didn't call. She sent a lawyer. He emailed a cease and desist. I replied with a screenshot of the original message, time-stamped and archived. I got no response after that. The story spread beyond the county. National outlets picked it up. A podcast did a 5-part series on the Bennett collapse. Someone made a documentary trailer. A book agent emailed me. I ignored all of it. Because I didn't do it for fame. I did it for erasure. For every time they used my work to polish their image. For every time I smiled through their toasts and handshakes, knowing I was the one building the house while they played God in the ballroom. I did it because that portrait was supposed to hang in the entrance of the estate. Gregory told me it would greet every guest for the next 100 years. But now, that wall was bare. Their empire had no entryway, no legacy, no illusion of loyalty. Just a scorch mark. The Bennett estate sat silent now. The gates were chained, the lights stayed off even on weekends, lawn overgrown, fountains dry. The windows, once cleaned every morning by a private crew, now smudged with rain and dirt. A decade of wealth and power reduced to a house with locked doors and a dying garden. I passed it sometimes, on the way to nowhere. Not to gloat, just to remember. They used to own everything. The council, the Chamber of Commerce, the land, even the art museum had a wing named after Eleanor. But one by one, their name disappeared. Quietly. Strategically, as if removing it would remove the shame. Gregory fled first. After the audits came through and the banks froze his access, he booked a flight to the Caribbean. Took Ryan with him. They posted a few photos pretending to be on vacation. The comments were brutal. After that, nothing. No location tags, no updates, just silence. I heard rumors. He was trying to sell property through proxies, pushing what little he had left under aliases. But no one would touch him. The Bennett brand had become toxic. The same handshakes that once opened doors now locked them shut. Eleanor stayed behind. She moved into the old guest house at the edge of the estate. Alone. Her staff gone. Her legacy turned to ash. I saw her once, just a glimpse, standing by the window. No pearls, no posture, just a woman wrapped in a shawl, staring out into the empty driveway. That should have been enough. But it wasn't, because they still had one thing left. Their reputation in the private sector, in the world that didn't care about press or ethics or lawsuits. The underground money, the unregulated land deals in Nevada, the foreign investors, the deals built on whispers and backroom dinners. They were trying to build something new out there, a new name, a new face, a new version of the Bennett machine without the shame. I found the Shell Corporation. It was filed under a minor consultant's name, but the patterns were familiar. The language in the filings, the copy in the brochures. I knew Eleanor's fingerprints like a blueprint. I tracked the flow of money. Quiet, small investments from familiar names. They were trying to come back, smaller, smarter, hidden. So I dug deeper. I went to Nevada, posed as a land surveyor, spent 3 weeks in motels following paper trails and contractor schedules. I made friends with a junior clerk at the planning commission, bought drinks for a guy who laid pipe on the outskirts of town. Every detail added weight. Then I found it, the documents proving Eleanor's involvement. The new land project was tied to funds laundered through a collapsed Bennett property in Oregon. A perfect loop. Disconnected just enough to confuse regulators, but I had the full thread, the same kind of abuse, the same kind of lies. I packaged it all, just like before. But this time, I didn't leak it publicly. I sent it straight to the investors. Every name listed in the Nevada shell company got an anonymous envelope. Documents, signatures, a copy of the Oregon transaction, a note typed in block font. You're buying poison. This family ruins everything it touches. Within days, the investment pool fractured. 3 partners pulled out. 1 filed for fraud protection, another hired their own forensic accountant, and suddenly half the project was under review. I watched Eleanor's final effort unravel in real time. That night, I walked the trail behind the Bennett estate, the one I helped design. A winding path through trees with lights hidden under the brush. She used to call it the Promenade of Legacy. It led to the stone patio where Gregory held brandy tastings. I reached the clearing just as dusk fell. There, nailed to the far side of the stone wall, was a canvas. Another painting. Not commissioned, not framed, crude, water-warped. It was me, but not the version they once glorified. This was charcoal on linen, harsh lines, my eyes sunken, shoulders slumped. A man who had been used, emptied, and made hollow. It was signed in red ink. We remember everything. Layers of water. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, staring, while the wind rolled through the trees. Eleanor had sent her message. She knew it was over. But she wasn't begging. She wasn't apologizing. She was mourning. Not for me, not for the truth. For the empire she built on silence. I left it there, let the rain take it. Because that was the difference between us. She built legacies on illusion. Earned illusions to get to the truth. The estate finally sold. A quiet transaction, buried in the back pages of the local property transfers. No fanfare, no headlines. The Bennett name was never mentioned. The buyer was a development firm from Austin, young, hungry, faceless. They planned to gut it, turn it into a boutique hotel, 10 rooms, private events, maybe a spa. The article said the new owners called the estate a timeless structure with untapped potential. No mention of the legacy. No trace of the family who once ruled the town like monarchs. I walked by it one last time. The chains were gone, the gate stood open, half leaning on its rusted hinges. The garden, once trimmed to precision, now just weeds and scattered petals. A wrecking crew had already begun stripping the side wings. I didn't step inside. I didn't need to. The house had become its own tomb. I thought I'd feel peace. Or maybe triumph. I thought I'd watch it fall and feel a final severance from the years I spent suffocating under their thumb. But the truth was simpler. I felt nothing. Because the real burn happened long before the estate crumbled. It happened the moment I lit the match under that portrait and refused to pretend any longer. That was the real fire, the one that burned the lie. Still, I had one thing left to do. One door left unopened. In a storage unit off the highway, behind a row of metal garages with peeling numbers, I kept a box. Just one. I hadn't touched it in years. It was filled with fragments. Things from my early days with them, letters, blueprints, a tie Gregory gave me on my first anniversary, a handwritten note from Eleanor that said, "To the one who makes our dreams real." The paper had yellowed. Her ink had faded to dusted gray. I pulled out the last item, a smaller portrait, oil on canvas, the original study for the larger one they unveiled at the gala. Less detailed, more honest. My face still wore that polite smile, but the eyes were unfinished. The brushstrokes were lighter, hesitant. It was what the artist had seen before the Bennetts commissioned the lie. I took it outside and set it on the gravel. Then I crushed it with a sledgehammer. Not because I was angry, because I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't part of their story now. I wasn't frozen in their version of the truth. I didn't exist on their walls or their plaques or their fake speeches. I existed in the ashes, in the silence after the last applause, in the echo of their name being erased. And I had one last visit to make. Eleanor Bennett's grave sat at the far corner of the cemetery, away from the family plot. She died during a heat wave in late summer. Cardiac arrest. No funeral, no flowers. Just a 5-lid obituary written by a private lawyer and submitted without photo. The stone was small, flat, unadorned. No titles, no epithets. Just her name and 2 dates. I stood there for a long time. The wind was dry, the sun relentless, but the silence around her was louder than anything. "You lost," I said softly. No rage in my voice, no satisfaction, just truth. You tried to make me yours, tried to write me into your story like I owed you something. You painted a lie and called it legacy, but legacies don't survive without truth. I dropped a small envelope at the base of her headstone. Inside were photos of the estate as it stood now, overgrown, torn apart. One final image of the wrecking ball punching through the wall where my portrait once hung. And one last note, handwritten in black ink. I wasn't yours. Not then. Not ever. Turned and walked away. No need to look back. No ghosts followed me. No echoes called my name. Because when you burn a false legacy, the smoke clears more than the air. It frees the space where something real can finally grow. I never rebuilt what they took from me. They thought it was, I didn't need to. I walked forward carrying something better than a portrait. I carried the truth, and that was mine alone.